and I would like all of you to welcome Dr. Coates to the stage. Thank you.
She never called me Dr. Coates and said nice things like that when we worked together at the University of Saskatchewan. So it's good to get you in a different format here, Deb. It's wonderful. I always feel sort of weird when you have those descriptions of who I am and what I've done over the periods of time, because it makes it sound like I have a very short attention span and haven't been able to focus on anything. But you missed out one thing, which we know actually, because Deb and I, it turns out, are almost neighbors. I live on DeCourcy Island. As some of you will know, and my wife is in Saskatchewan. I'm currently working in the Yukon, but we live in DeCourcy Island. So you figure that one out. Why are we there? We're on DeCourcy Island because of something I'm going to tell you today, and that is that there's a great secret, and the secret is Vancouver Island. And I'm going to explain this. I'm going to say some things that you won't find very comfortable. I don't mean to offend anybody. I honestly won't try to, but Vancouver Island has a chance to be a world leader in the revitalization of small towns and rural areas. Not a world leader, not just a Canadian leader. And one of the things, I'll talk about this more as I go along, one of the things that I find so frustrating about Canada, and then to a certain extent about Vancouver Island, is that we're so modest, and we aim too low. We don't really realize what's going on around the world, don't really position ourselves relative to other places. Right now, Vancouver Island, and I'll come back to this later on, flies way below the national, on the national radar, way below other places. People just don't know about Vancouver Island. They know about Victoria, they know about Vancouver. By the way, but I really appreciate the fact that you had snow ready for me. When I got here today, it was really nice to sort of feel right back at home. But people don't know very much about Vancouver Island, and that's something you have to work on. And I'll talk a little bit of how you can get there. But let me talk first about Canada's challenges. And I'm going to sort of talk about Canada's challenges and then some of the things that Vancouver Island is facing, because nothing's perfect. We always got things to work on. But a couple of things about Canada. Canada's falling behind. On almost every major metric, Canada's actually sliding away. On productivity, on competitiveness, on the number of doctors per capita, on almost everything you can imagine, we're actually not doing particularly well. We are losing interest among foreign investors. Foreign investors are increasingly afraid of coming and investing in Canada. They can see the economic potential, they just don't feel particularly welcome right now. Deb mentioned something that's really important to me, and that's the question of what I call the city-state economy. We are going through a massive influx of population. The population is growing unbelievably fast in this country, but almost all of the growth is in about 6 cities. This is Vancouver and it's Calgary. Edmonton doesn't rate. Saskatchewan doesn't rate. Winnipeg doesn't even qualify. Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa. These are the places that are really growing like crazy. And we have, it's interesting, we have 3 of the top 10 cities in the world in Canada. We do urban development extremely well. Small town development, we don't do particularly well. And that huge sucking sound you hear is money and talent being drawn into the big cities and away from places like Vancouver Island and even a place like Nanaimo. We don't have a handle on immigration, and we have to think about that. Our productivity decline is marked in almost every sector. We have very low rates of investment in new technologies, which is very concerning. And an issue that's really important to me, and the reason I'm back in the Yukon, I taught with Deb at the University of Saskatchewan for quite some time, and I just moved to the Yukon, which is where I was raised, is because of the opportunity to work with Indigenous folks. As a nation, our progress on reconciliation is noisy and somewhat ineffective. So we talk about it a lot. We do lots of nice, superficial, symbolic things in terms of actually affecting the lives of Indigenous peoples in a way that they want to have done. We're not doing so well. We suffer from a national regulatory overburden. We're really good at creating new rules and regulations. We're not very good at taking them away. That's a real problem. We have a very odd and strange response to climate change. I spent a lot of time in Scandinavia, and if you've ever been to Norway and Faroe Islands and Iceland, these places are doing really well, much better than Canada, by the way. Norway has one of the world's best approaches to climate change. They're doing really well on a whole bunch of things. And you know what they just opened up? A brand new oil field. They're expanding their oil industry. So what's Canada doing? We're closing our oil industry and robbing ourselves as a nation of a lot of money. There's some emissions issues we can talk about in a different sort of context, but we haven't got climate change figured out. We haven't got to figure out how to do our approach to climate change, emissions reduction and things of that sort, in a way that still keeps our economy really strong. And we're not doing very well in terms of technological change, partly because we don't invest very much in it as a nation, but technology is changing the world of work very, very rapidly. And we sort of watch it, and we look, it's like watching a car, a big train coming towards you. Oh, look at all work is changing. All these people are working from home, or you're being replaced by computers. And we should be worried about that. We don't do anything about it. And as a consequence of all of these things and a whole bunch more, I have never been more worried about the future of Canada than I am today. I grew up in the era of René Lévesque and the Parti Québécois. Many of you are too young to remember either of those references. But it's interesting. Canada's fraying. National unity is weaker than it's ever been, which is very, very worrisome. So what happens? No, that's by the way. I love Canada. I think it's the greatest nation on the face of the earth, so don't get me wrong. It's like when you love your kids and you're the greatest critic of them at exactly the same time, right? That's me, that for sure. So what about Vancouver Island? What are the issues that sort of are defining Vancouver Island in some interesting ways? Well, number one, the dominance of Greater Victoria. Victoria is growing like a really, really bad fungus. And it's a beautiful fungus. That's the kind of nice thing. Mushrooms aren't bad, but fungi can just grow like crazy, right? I lived in Victoria. I taught at the University of Victoria for 6 years. I love the city. Have tons of friends down there. But wow, is it ever getting out of control? It's really, really interesting. We've seen the decline in the resource sector that actually propped up and gave Vancouver Island an enviable quality of life for generations. Watching what's happening in the fishing industry is very sad. Issues around logging and whatever. This one will get some people here upset with me. I apologize. Somebody has got to fix Highway 1 between Nanaimo and Victoria. This is probably, I lived in New Brunswick before. I've traveled on almost every single, my father's a highway engineer, so I actually know about things like culverts and gravel and all these kinds of stuff. Probably the least effective part of the Trans-Canada Highway is actually between Nanaimo and Victoria. And if you don't fix that, this whole island suffers daily as a consequence of that. Smaller communities suffer from a lack of access and transportation. The island is dealing with very rapid population growth. I'll come back to that in a minute. You've got a huge influx of seniors. This is going to be one of the most attractive places for seniors in North America. And the healthcare system can't keep up. You must know all of that. Everybody has stories about how that's working out around them. Vancouver Island has a very low profile for technological innovation. The things that get profile are tourism things, natural resources, beautiful spots, beaches and things of that sort. You have a number of things going on here, but you don't talk about them. There's no real impression that Vancouver Island is a happening place where the world is growing very, very, very quickly. So Vancouver Island has wonderful things. And I'm going to talk about some things that are even more wonderful than I hope you probably imagine. But it's a challenging time, absolutely a challenging time. So I described my talk today as Future Unlimited. And so what does that mean? And why? Put it a different way. This is Vancouver Island's moment. The next 20 years will be the most important 20 years, I think, in the history of this island. And the opportunity is there to take advantage of it. But if you don't, you're going to pay it long-term consequences. I'll put this to you. Some of you may have traveled to these places. If you look at what they're doing in the Faroe Islands, what they've done on ice in Iceland, what they're doing right today in Greenland, building brand new airfields, big airfields and all that kind of stuff, then go out to the Nanaimo airport and see how many flights a day there are going to Vancouver and Calgary, and how many there were compared to two years ago. The service has fallen off very, very dramatically. And like good Canadians, we just go and say, oh, that's too bad. I wonder why that's happening. We shouldn't be like that. So why is this Vancouver's moment? A couple of things. Aboriginal reconciliation. You have some number of sessions here at this conference on the summit on Aboriginal reconciliation. Have 3 times as many next year and 4 times as many the year after that. Aboriginal reconciliation is the future of this island in some wonderful, wonderful ways. This is not a curse, it's not a punishment, it's nothing else. The Indigenous communities are expanding very rapidly. They've found their economic feet. They've got some legal rights behind them finally. They're doing some amazing, amazing things. And I think Vancouver Island has the potential to show the world how to do reconciliation properly. And you see it in symbols. We see it in some relationships, the property that's developed just south of Nanaimo here towards Cedar, and the inclusion of Indigenous people in that planning process, really kind of exciting. But in Canada, this is a missed opportunity. Vancouver Island must not miss this. How often do you think of how many Indigenous people there are on your island? There are more Indigenous people, more First Nations people, than in the Yukon and Northwest Territories combined on Vancouver Island. And you know the communities, they're here and there, but there are more Indigenous, more First Nations people on Vancouver Island than Yukon and Northwest Territories combined. There's a huge opportunity. Second one, climate. Not today so much. Some of you probably were cursing a little bit. It was 19 below in Whitehorse yesterday, so if you whine, I don't want to listen to any of that from you folks. But here's the problem in Canada. Canadians are the worst northern nation on the face of the earth. If you look at what Finland, Norway, and Sweden do in terms of nordicity, what Russia does in terms of how the Icelanders and the Greenlandic people and the Faroe Islanders and all these other folks, how they respond to winter, Canada does it really poorly. Most of our population is south of the 49th parallel. And the part that isn't south of the 49th parallel is in the West Edmonton Mall. You know, we don't have a real sense of embracing winter in a positive way. So for Vancouver Island, this is manna from heaven, because you don't have winter. Those 5 days of snow a year don't count. On the North Island, I know you have more, and you have this wonderful thing where you get to have the ski hills, but also you get to come to DeCourcy in the middle of January, and my wife goes swimming in the wintertime. She's crazy. I'll come back to that later on. The other thing that's also happening, and it's a really important one, is that a growing number of people are getting upset with urban living. So it's a bit of a contradiction. The cities are growing like crazy, but people don't necessarily want to always stay there. So watch for the expanding of the urban fringe. You now have a wonderful fast ferry going back and forth from Nanaimo to Vancouver. Over the next little while, you're going to see thousands of people sort of move over here and go over there to work 1 or 2 days a week. I'm sure that's the business model. But how far will that extend? Is that urban fringe of Vancouver going to go all the way up into Courtenay and Comox, into Campbell River? Is it going to go over as far as Tofino and Yakulit? Who knows? Second part, what I call lone wolves. Lone wolves are a really incredible part of the economy. When we do economic development, we spend a lot of time trying to get a company to relocate. How do you get ABC Corporation to come here and hire 14 people or 24 people or even 50 people, a big company, right? We spend almost no effort going after lone eagles or lone wolves. I'm not sure if it's an eagle or a wolf, call it whatever you want, but they're by themselves. And these lone wolves are essentially international professionals. They're people who can work anywhere in the world. And so just to go back to our little island in DeCourcy, when the pandemic broke out, my wife and I were in Saskatoon, and we could see the pandemic was going to last for a long time. We thought it's going to be at least 2 or 3 more weeks before it winds down. So we packed up and got our dog and a cat and put them in the car from Saskatoon and made it across the borders. Alberta wasn't very friendly, so we drove really fast. And we came into BC, BC we discovered it's not a good idea in the pandemic to drive to BC with Saskatchewan plates. That was not very good. So we covered them with mud, actually, so people wouldn't see where we were from. So we onto the island, and of course the pandemic struck out for another. We ended up staying 2.5 years. And still working in Saskatchewan, but only going back and forth very once in a while. Over that period of time, and if you've ever been to DeCourcy only has 150 properties. It's not a very big place. And in the wintertime, there were usually like 10 families living there. So when we were there with 10 other families, it's a beautiful, amazing, best place, just an amazing place. 5 professionals relocated to DeCourcy during the pandemic. They came over, moved over from Vancouver and said, we got a summer cabin here, let's fix it up a little bit. And 4 of them are still there, right? And that's happening all across Vancouver Island. And nobody's actually tracking it or keeping count of who's where. This is a huge part of the economy of the future. If you can get those professionals, they may be architects or engineers, university professors, et cetera, you can get them to sort of come into the Vancouver Island. The economic impact is absolutely stunning. Because we spend lots of money. We travel through the airports, and so there's more traffic going through, that sort of thing. Another reason, the growth of high-end tourism is really quite something globally. And it's kind of an interesting thing. If anybody's been to Europe over the last 3 or 4 years, and before the pandemic and after the pandemic, Europe is completely overrun. there are literally hundreds of thousands of people. There's whole communities that are trying to figure out how to keep American cruise ships away. They don't want the cruise ships and all the numbers and all the chaos and stuff that happens. Vancouver Island has an unbelievable capacity to actually expand its high-end tourism and to make it into something that would be globally significant. During the pandemic, you had a lot more people coming over from Vancouver than before. They came from other parts of Canada. Now you have to go after the whole world. Watching Tofino and Ucluelet, I first went there about 25 years ago. Amazing place at the time. It was kind of rustic, you know. Now you go there and just to go to the lineups at the taco truck, you know. This is one little taco truck, and you have to wait there for 20 minutes. You know, who makes reservations for a taco truck, right? But the people are coming. I'm not sure Vancouver Island is ready for them. And you notice that with the problem with the road to Ucluelet and Tofino, the construction that's going on and the washouts and stuff that have occurred. The neat thing about here is that you have everything. Because you actually have wilderness, complete wilderness experience of the highest order. You have indigenous tourism, which just before the pandemic in 2019 was on the verge of $1 billion a year across Canada. And then the pandemic kicked the stuffing out of it. And since most of the companies were new, many of them actually went broke during the pandemic. But that'll come back very quickly. So you have this incredible series of opportunities that I hope you'll figure out how to expand. And the last one, which comes back to my main theme, is you have a network of attractive small towns. This is actually getting to be quite rare. When the cities draw everybody into the big city, the smaller towns start to erode, and you can't get professionals to go to the town. You can't get teachers and doctors and lawyers and stuff to work there. This island is unbelievable. You have these incredible rural areas. Some of them on the islands, they're remarkable. You have one of the most attractive cities in the world. Costa Nestor, I can't pronounce that one, that big tourism magazine just declared Victoria one of the most attractive places in the world. And they're right. These places, stunning, absolutely stunning. Nanaimo has more unrealized potential than it probably realizes. I think when Nanaimo's got focused on becoming a suburb of Vancouver, and it should become focused on being the capital of the northern part of Vancouver Island instead. And I think if they start doing that, you'll attract a very different kind of investor and a very different kind of perception of your own place. You will never be any better than you think you are. And if you think all you are is a suburb of Vancouver, you'll always be that, right? So you have to have that greater vision. I look at Vancouver Island small towns, and I think you see a whole bunch of communities that are completely ripe for reinvention. You know, if I told you that within a matter of a couple of years, if you worked at it, you could have 10,000 of those lone wolves sort of moving here, each bringing their $150,000, $250,000, $300,000 incomes and all of their activity into your small towns, the economic impact of that is staggering, absolutely staggering. So you're losing some forest operations, and that's really sad. But on the other hand, these opportunities are really great. My wife, who's a political scientist at the University of Saskatchewan, does a tremendous, she's got a huge research interest in lattes, which of course, and I've had one sip of coffee in my entire life, and I married somebody who lives for lattes, right? I get up at 6 in the morning to drive to the latte store, well, no, it's not even a cafe, I guess you call it, and bring them back. So my wife came up with what she calls the Holroyd Latte Index. And this is serious stuff. You think I'm joking, and I'm actually not. The Holroyd Latte Index basically says, Karen Holroyd can walk into your small town, and she can tell you within a matter of minutes whether you'll have trouble attracting professionals and lawyers and doctors and high-income people. And what happens, she says, just show me the cafes. And you go and talk to a mayor, and the mayor says, oh, we got a Timmy's. You can go down to Tim's. Oh, don't do that. The professionals are on it. What happens is almost all young people in North America are educated in places with lots of coffee shops. They spend half their life in more time in the coffee shops than they do in their houses, and certainly more than they do in classrooms, right? So they grow up with these lattes, and you walk. We used to do this in Ontario. We'd drive through a town, and you'd walk through and you see a Tim Hortons. Or I'm going to pick on Tim Hortons. If somebody from there is, somebody who owns a Tim Hortons is here, they're going to punch me out. Just remember how big I am. But you just know that these were not places that were going to attract those high quality professionals that you need to keep a city going, right? And so anyway, to be honest, this is actually a little bit of a joke. I actually started writing stuff and giving talks like this and talking about the whole Roy Latte Index. She's never done this. She's never created it. So she gets mad I told her this before I started today. I said, I'm going to talk about the Latte Index. Please don't. So I didn't talk about the Latte Index today. But I can tell you it works. You can go into small town. Now, the neat thing here is that on Vancouver Island and on the Gulf Islands, you have a lot of coffee shops. And they're not just coffee shops, they're good coffee shops. What's the definition of a good coffee shop? Well, it actually is really nice bite things to eat. You know, little fancy sandwiches and all that kind of stuff, really good lattes, and a fern bar, something like that, right? It doesn't take very much. If you don't have it, you're not going to attract the right people. So how can you capture the future? I think the potential here is absolutely staggering. I think it's one of the best in the world. We really quite literally say that. So what do you have to do? You have to develop the region's profile and brand. I hope you don't get offended by this. You don't have one. Vancouver Island does not have a profile and a brand right now. It's hard to separate yourself from Vancouver and from British Columbia and from Victoria. Prince Edward Island is much better known as a beauty spot than Vancouver Island is on a national scale. Recognize your growth trajectory. I think Vancouver Island should be Canada's 11th province. I'm not sure if that's in your aspirational package anywhere. It might be the 12th, because Northern Ontario is getting sick of Toronto, and so they might actually break away. Toronto wants to keep them there. But you know, right now, your current population, you're larger than 3 provinces, and you're larger than all the territories. Of the 13 jurisdictions in the country, Vancouver Island is right smack in the middle, which is really interesting. It's only a couple of years before you'll actually have a larger population in Nova Scotia and Saskatchewan. You're growing much, much faster than those places, and I think it's 10 years to 15 years before you catch up to Manitoba, which is really, really interesting. I don't hear people talking about this very much. You have to get the basics right. I'll only pick on one example, BC Ferries. BC Ferries, how many times, we panic all the time we're on to Corsi because is the ferry going to go? Will I get across to make my flight? All that kind of stuff. We've got to get those basic things absolutely down pat and make it so it's a guaranteed part. We need to recognize that Vancouver Island is underrepresented in Ottawa. You have 6 members representing Vancouver Island. 4 of them are actually really in the Victoria, 3 of them I guess in the Victoria area, but they overlap a bit. Saskatchewan has 14. You're almost the same size. Saskatchewan has 14 members of parliament. New Brunswick has 11. Nova Scotia has 10, right? How you build your national voice? How does this island get a national prominence and talk as a sort of a single region? I think the island has to collaborate far more than it does on immigration. New Canadians are going to be a huge part of our economy going forward. We keep relaxing and changing the regulations about professionals and getting more professionals to come in from other countries. Do it in a coordinated fashion. Bring everybody on this together. You have to manage development and growth. I'm not sure if you ever, and when I say the Portland model, I don't mean the current one. Portland is in really serious difficulty right now. They've kind of lost control of sort of social order in parts of the city, and it's kind of very, very difficult. But Portland, about 15, 20 years ago, decided they didn't want to be Seattle. They didn't want to keep growing and growing and growing. But think of the numbers, right? How large do you want to be? Do you want to get to 1.5 million people on the current trajectory? Just not doing anything deliberate. The Vancouver Island will have about 1.5 million people in about 35 years. That's without any effort, without expanding it, recruiting people, and all that kind of stuff, right? Canada is talking about growing to 100 million people by 2070. At my age, that's a really long way away. I'm not going to see it, but some of you will see it. A lot of you will see it. But what is our portion of the population? Have you thought of Vancouver Island with 2.5 million people? Because that's what it is. If we go to 100 million in the country, do you want that? The answer is, it's not a yes or no answer. Because where are you going to put them all? Build houses, have more ferries? What are you going to do in that regard? I don't think people, I say this about almost every jurisdiction in the country. When I go to the north and ask governments in the Yukon Northwest Territories, what's your growth plan? Well, some people come and some leave. That's not a growth plan. What's your target? How large do you want to be? And where do you want those people to live? Do you want all the people in urban areas? Some people want that. They think it's more ecologically sound to have them in urban areas. But if you spread it across this island, all of what are now small towns could become, small cities. What are small cities could become bigger cities, and the little villages could become small towns. You could have a remarkable transition. by just planning that correctly. I think we need a much more proactive environmental renewal. We spend a huge amount of time fighting over important things, but fighting too much about them. The old growth forestry has really sucked a lot of vitality out of this island. And that's not to criticize anybody on either side. These are things that people hold very dearly, and it's critical to the success of this area. But, you know, can we really get serious about this? Can we rebuild the fish populations? It's hard work. Can we make it into something really, really important? Make sure that the beauty of the coasts and the forests are maintained, but find a balance between industry and conservation. Those things really have to go together. You know, if the small towns, if they are not part of your conversation about the ecological future of Vancouver Island, you're going to pay a real price for that. Because communities will decline, people will be disenfranchised, there'll be frustrations and political protests and things of that nature. I would love to see more regional engagement with First Nations business. Not just First Nations reconciliation. First Nation business are really quite remarkable. And I'll give you on a really, I find this absolutely fascinating. I've been working on this for a long time. The power and the passion of Indigenous women entrepreneurs is absolutely through the roof. If you want any... If you want any further proof that women are taking over the world, just watch Indigenous women, right? And the good thing is, I've talked to a lot of Indigenous women about this. They promise to be just as nice to men over the next 2,000 years as men were to women over the last 2,000 years. So there's absolutely nothing to worry about. I think the Indigenous economy is growing very fast. Harness that. Don't harness it by taking advantage and manipulating or anything else. These are your partners. Make them your neighbors. Make them your friends. Build a future together. The Indigenous communities are back with a vengeance. They are sick and tired. I always find this really interesting. When you look at the start of land claims, this is a small aside. When you look at the start of land claims, do you know what the #1 protest they had? Was welfare dependency. They were sick of this, and when they started in the early 70s, they were tired of welfare dependency. Well, guess what we do even now? We build welfare dependency because we have not found the courage and the gumption to embrace Indigenous businesses as our friends and as our partners. I would also suggest, and this is where universities in particular can be critical, and particularly a university has so many campuses in many small towns. You know, a big university doesn't have the reach of these other ones. Be a test bed for emerging technologies. We are in the fastest growing technological time in world history. Nothing remotely like what it is right now, right? There's more scientists working today than in all of human history combined. You sort of block this off from 20 years ago and say how many scientists are around and compare all the scientists before. We're producing scientists like crazy. Not as many in Canada as we need, but in places like China and India is growing like crazy. The Middle East is growing very fast. So what would I do? Seniors care. Go to, if you're in this area and you haven't been to Japan, go to Japan and see what the Japanese are doing about seniors care, how they're using robots and all sorts of remote technologies. You know, remake your regional healthcare system, particularly around seniors. They are going to be sort of the economic engine in many parts of Vancouver Island. Continue to explore alternative energy systems, solar, wind power, SMRs, tidal power. You know, green can be a foundation of prosperity. They aren't antithetical. I think that's really important. I also think we should be looking at new technologies as a way of controlling our destiny. How would you do that? 2 examples. We should be looking at food factories. I'm sure there'll be really good food factories. Food factories are simply vertical greenhouses. Hydroponics and things of that sort. You can have complete food independence on Vancouver Island really easily, and way cheaper than you can anywhere else in the country because of the weather. And we don't explore anywhere near enough what we can do with 3D printing. I always find it so fascinating. You got a problem with Indigenous housing? You can build a 3D printed house, 1,200 square feet for $48,000 and do it in 48 hours. So how many 3D printed homes are you seeing going up around this province and around this island? Not very many. For some reason, we're reluctant. They're building 3D printed homes in China for big suburbs. They're building 3D printed homes in France for cottages and things of that sort. You know, we should be experimenting and working with this. I think there's a huge opportunity for us to be an absolute world leader on Vancouver Island in electric planes. The first commercial electric plane actually flew out of the Vancouver South Harbor and flew over here. right? We should have a whole fleet of those things. We should be exploring this like crazy. And the first region in the world that embraces electric outboard motors will actually reinvent boating. And if you think of all the coastlines and you think of all the islands and why do more people not live there, think of how much it costs to run a gasoline engine, go pay your once a year $2,000 fee to get your stupid engine fixed and all that kind of stuff, and then listen to the lovely, lovely noise from people who think it's really fun to go right in front of your house at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and rev their engines really loud. You know, outboard motors run by electrical power, cheaper and more effective, and on and on. I think we have to, there's so many ways we can actually do this in different sorts of ways, and I've emphasized a lot about this proactive recruiting of the lone wolves. I think is very, very important. So when I sit here and think about Vancouver Island 10 and 20 years from now, I get excited more than you could probably imagine. You folks are Chamber of Commerce types, and you're business leaders, and you're institution leaders, and your whole job is to be excitable, right? And I'm a university professor, and we're supposed to be dour and boring, and maybe I've been boring. I apologize if I have been, but we're not supposed to be excitable, right? Vancouver Island excites the heck out of me when I think of what can be done, how things can change in some different ways. You live in paradise. You know that. You stood up at the beginning and sort of talked about all these things that were good about Vancouver Island. Everybody's sitting here saying, yeah, but you left mine out. I got 3 I'm added on the list, right? Everybody has 1,000 things. This is one of the most spectacular places on the planet in the greatest country the world's ever seen. Vancouver's embedded within Canada. And Canada, for all of its frustrations, and it drives me bonkers half the time, it has staggering potential. And it's your job collectively, our job collectively, to make something about it. So what do? Embrace a positive future with First Nations. Treasure your small towns and cities. Do not see them as burdens. Do not see them as problems. I think that done properly, and we're already halfway there, Vancouver Island could be one of the world leaders in the economic renewal of non-metropolitan areas. Now that sounds very academic. It means you're going to have prosperous small towns again. Initially, they were built on the resource sector, but you can rebuild them on the new economy, which I think could be really exciting. Please reinvent your relationship with senior citizens. They will be a major part of your economic future and your social future. Absolutely wonderful. I worry all the time, and I'm going to use a bad example. I'm frustrated by the inability of Canadians to think big. My father was a highway engineer, as I told you, right? And so we grew up in the world of the St. Lawrence Seaway and the Trans-Canada Highway and all these big projects that we're building, the different big dams, Mica Dam and things of that sort. We don't really do that anymore. And I just found it so frustrating. I was in the Faroe Islands. Anybody here been to the Faroe Islands before? Because then I can make up all sorts of stories knowing you haven't been there. Faroe Islands had like 58,000 people. And they're 18 little islands all hooked together. And we were driving through, and there was supposed to be a tunnel that would take us underground. And so I don't like going under the water like that. It's 11.3 kilometers long, this tunnel. So we're driving in there. My wife was on the phone on a FaceTime call with my daughter over in Canada. It's a great miracle of these new technologies. So she says, oh, by the way, we're going into a tunnel. We're going to lose your signal. Okay, fair enough. We went all the way through this tunnel, which is the first one in the world underwater tunnel like that to actually have a roundabout in the middle, which is really freaky. So you go in the middle, okay, we're going to go around this island, not sure which one we're supposed to go to. And we didn't lose the signal once. We didn't lose the signal once. Try driving from here to Tofino. Or sometimes when you drive up the North Island, going up to Port Hardy and Port McNeill and places like that, have they invented cell phones up here yet? I mean, it's amazing. Not that we don't, we're no worse here than we are in most part of Canada. Other countries are way better. The cell phone coverage off the coast of Greenland on a ferry is better than the cell phone coverage in rural Saskatchewan. It's really not necessary. So where's our big dream? I don't know what it is. I mean, we can build bridges. The Japanese build huge bridges. You can build tunnels. We can build tunnels. The Faroe Island builds tunnels. They build huge airports on Greenland right now that are going to completely revolutionize their tourism industry. I don't think we dream big enough anymore. I'm not sure what your vision is. So the last couple of points I would make would be this. Do not wait for other people to invent your future. Do not wait for government to do things for you. Define your own future. I mean, the people in this room, you represent a huge part of the sort of power base of Vancouver Island. and the people that you have within your circle of friends, that is who's going to define the future of Vancouver Island, your institutions, your organizations, your business leaders, your community leaders, city governments, and what have you. You know what's best. Define it, sell it, and build it. It doesn't matter to me what it is, as long as it's something you're truly excited about. And you know, I come to these things and give a talk, and my most strongest message to you is, don't just talk. Right? Do something about it. Figure out what it is. Of all the things you've imagined among yourselves, things you can actually do, become future focused. I would even say become future obsessed. The world will change very, very fast in the next 25 years. And then if you're waiting for the government of Canada or the government of British Columbia or major corporations to solve your issues, do not wait. They're not going to do it. That's not how the 21st century is really unfolding. My last comment is basically begging you to be bold. You need to raise your profile inside Canada and internationally. You have so much of what the world wants. You have such a lifestyle that is just almost unbeatable almost anywhere in the country. You can have Canada without winter. What an amazing combination. Very few places can actually say that. Let the world know who you are. Let the world know what you want to be. Invite the world to be part of this process and actually live up to your dreams. Dream big, big dreams, exciting big dreams, and make this place, which is already the most wonderful place on the planet, make it even better, more successful, and more prosperous. Have the Vancouver Island of the future that you want created together. Thank you very much.